So, I'm Mariajudille from Beurden, Cahn. This is Jacques Barth. I'm a historian and I'm a Holocaust and genocide specialist. And he is a physician. He's a cardiologist. And what it says on the program. I'm not a medical doctor. We both set up a study in Holland, I think in 2014, 2013. Yeah. About the consequences of the Shoah on the lives of the second generation, on the child survivors and the second generation. That's not what we are here for. The first results of this study are published in several books that are called Medical Review Auschwitz and can be found. But it looks a bit like the study of Cahn and all of you, Boaz and Miriam. Today we are going to present about the medical doctors during the Holocaust, and we have a flashing title. It says, "Only dead fish go with the flow." I'm not going to explain it. I hope that afterwards, after I tell you something, this presentation, that you understand something more about it. Let's see. Our study is about the Jewish Council and the medical doctors is based on a lot of new sources coming from the study we did on the physical well-being or not well-being of the second generation, because we found, and we also knew from our own families, that there is still a lot of material within the families, stories untold. So we have a lot of interviews and really historical sources, primary sources. If I want to tell you something about the Jewish Council and its medical doctors, then we should realize that the organizational structure of the Jewish Council is very important to, before we can go to the medical personnel. First of all, and you can see it in the slide, you have to realize that the Nazis had overriding position of what should happen in the council. And in Holland we had a very obedient council, Jewish council. The Jewish council had to execute what the Nazis really told them. And as part of the Jewish council there was a medical committee, and the medical committee gave advice to the Jewish Council, and to the medical doctors they recruited. So Dr. Ahrens, you see, is a very important person. He advised building for the people together, an assembly place. It was the Germans that instructed the Jewish Council to pick the Hollandsche Schouwburg, which is in the middle of Amsterdam. There, 3 doctors were recruited: Dr. Karel Roos, Bernard de Vries Robles, also called Brecht de Vries Robles, and Joseph van der Hal. They had to physically test the deputies if they were fit for transportation to the transit camp in Westerbork, and they had to smoothen the process so the people would go more willingly. As you saw on the last slide, it's a complete top-down construction. And that's the way it worked, because the Jewish Council, the chairman, Usher and Cahn, they were very obedient to the Germans. They were also paternalistic. They built in 1 year time, from February 91 till March 2042, a huge organization. Whereas in the middle of 42, 20,000 people worked. It was like a mini ministry for Jewish deportation. This organization was bureaucratic, had a lot of departments, committees, subcommittees, and advisement. And everything had to be accounted for in a bureaucratic way. That's rather different than you find in Eastern Europe. What the Hollandse Schouwburg is for a building. It's a theater. It was meant as a theater. It's not quite a place you expect for a deputation place or an assembly place. It looked like the picture with a lot of red. You see the chairs, and you see the map of the construction. And I can tell you that on the top floor there was storage. On the left, this was the cellar. People came in on the first floor, and there were doctors on the second floor. The medical doctors took care of 500 to 1,000 deputies, 24 hours, and the people stayed in the Hollandse Schouwburg 24 hours till up to a few weeks. As Hannah told yesterday, the doctors tried to change diagnosis, they shammed, they tried to give people certificates that they were unable to travel for a certain amount of time, because there was only one goal of the Germans. It was an overall goal. People in the building would be traveling to Westerbork. No exception, not even when you are sick. The building was completely unsuited to keep as many people. There was no sanitation, only 5 toilets. There was and 2 sinks, and there was a constant stench because the people defecated in the orchestra where the orchestra sat, and the lights were left on because people were very panicky, and it was very noisy, 24 hours a day. The 3 doctors had to anticipate in this situation. They were all Dutch trained, and they were all of a Dutch nationality. And they faced complete desolated people. And they also had to give the Nazis the numbers they needed. This is the Jewish Council. As said, the Jewish Council of Amsterdam was shaped in 1941. It became the only Jewish council of the Netherlands in 1942. Here you see the Jewish Council. I said 20,000 people. You have to, if you compare figures, there lived 80,000 Jews in Amsterdam before the war. So it was quite a large ministry for Jewish affairs. above you see, the first man is Bram Asher. He was a very wealthy diamond tradesman, and the man you see on the below is Professor David Cahn. He was a professor in classic literature and ancient history. You can see I think the same photo as yesterday Hannah showed, Jewish Council. And all members of the council had this band around their arm. So you could recognize it. If you want to compare it to Eastern Europe, the Jewish Council in Holland didn't have a strict Jewish police. It wasn't necessary. The people were quite obedient. Panicky, but obedient. The Jewish doctors tried their best to keep up their ethical medical standards. Yes, as Hannah said, they exacerbated symptoms. They did small sham operations because they couldn't operate in Hollandsche Schouwburg, and it was all to keep patients as long as possible for deportation. On the left you see the head of deportations of the Dutch Jews, Ferdinand Austerfunten, Hauptsturmführer, Leiter der Zentralstelle der jüdischen Auswanderung in Amsterdam. The man had one good characteristic. He was in need of alcohol, and the people in Hollandsche Schouwburg, they took to these habits to feed him as lots and lots of alcohol, so he would be more willing to work with them. This is what the Germans said the Jewish Council should do. They should register all Jews. They should keep surveillance over Jewish life, and they should do the central control over the emigration. Medical doctors in Hollandsche Schouwburg were Roos, Doctor of Internal Affairs. He was Dutch trained. He executed really what the Jewish Council asked of him. Nothing more, nothing less. He did his utmost best. He must have saved deputies in an off-site medical office, which was very, very small. It was on the second floor. And after the war, the doctor Rose didn't want to have to do with anything with Judaism. He kept silent, never wrote down his memories, didn't speak with his children about it, and he died relatively young. We only found one obituary of him, and it said he was a Jew, he suffered during the war. That was it. On the right you see what the Jewish Council expected of its doctors. Obedience. Complete obedience. And towards the Germans, their purpose was to prevent further escalation for the Jews, to mitigate, care for the Jewish population, which was offering food and console them, food and water, in the Hollandse Schouwburg. And then point 4, which was a bit very bit, that's a terrible thing to say, but they tried to select the right group within the Jewish population for after the war. So they tried to save people, the better ones, for Judaism. So there would be Judaism after the war. Who were those other medical doctors? On the left, Bernard Vries Robles, general practitioner. After the war he became an anesthesiologist. We don't know much about him, otherwise that he tried to let people escape. And afterwards, only to his children he told some stories about the war. And I read one yesterday, and his son said, my father, he was the doctor, he established a doctor's post in the Hollandse Schouwburg, which is of course not really what happened. It was not his father alone, there were other people. And it was a decision of the German council. He did not want to have anything to do with Judaism. It was too painful. Like Karel Roos, he died relatively young. Bernard Vries Robles only became 59 years of age. And Karel Roos, 62 years of age. And then we have the third doctor, which was on the payroll of the Jewish Council, Joseph van der Hal, a general practitioner. He was also Dutch trained, and when he couldn't practice anymore from 41 and up, he moved his practice to the Joodse Invalide, and there he was picked away by the Jewish Council for the Hollandse Schouwburg. There's an extensive interview of Joseph van der Hal, done by the Visual History Archive, the Shoah Foundation, and in it he tells a lot about his frustration. And his frustration is he couldn't do enough, but his largest frustration, his biggest frustration is about the bureaucracy he had to do. So he had to fill in all kinds of forms. And the man was twice arrested. For the first time it was for something very small, that someone saw him smuggle someone out of the Hollandse Schouwburg, and he was arrested himself. He was sent to a prison for the resistance fighters in The Hague. It's called Oranje Hotel. And he escaped from the Oranje Hotel, and then he was picked up as being a Jew, and he was brought into the Hollandse Schouwburg, and he immediately placed on a train to Westerbork. And there came the second escape. He escaped from the train before the train arrived in Westerbork, and he went into hiding the rest of the war. After the war he became a general practitioner again. He is one of the people who led the Jewish community after the war. He installed several institutions, was very active in synagogue, and yeah, he really was a community leader. But at the end of his life, he only talked about the traumas of what he has seen, and he was very traumatized about the Jewish Council leaders, Asher and Cahn, and he was very disappointed in the rabbis. Could the doctors have done more? Like I said, we study. If you want to know, you have to study new sources. We are not even half of what we have done. Was this medical, this question we ask ourselves, was the medical sabotage effective? Should we have other approaches? What do we do with the ambivalence towards the Jewish Council? We know that there's very little literature on the Jewish doctors in the Hollandse Schouwburg. What we do is, we try to do is look at out of the box, thinking out of the box, and we found an example out of the box on which we have a lot of sources, and that is on Jeremias Barth, and he was a refugee from Vienna, and a decorated World War soldier, and with a lot of life experiences, who became a doctor in Vienna, who had a very good practice, and he fled end of 1938. He was a doctor of the mouth. So he was not just a dental practitioner, he was a doctor of the mouth. He did all kinds of operations. He also built a lot of technical material to work easier. And he entered the Hollandse Schouwburg by chance. He had to deliver dentures to someone who was picked up by a razzia. And the dentures weren't paid, and he needed the money because a refugee, he could not practice, he needed the money. He went into the Hollandse Schouwburg and to collect the money for the dentures, and he got it. And he also got, they let him through the building, and then he met Auster Funten, the Hauptstromführer. And he said, oh, you're a dentist, you're a dentist, you're a Jew. Could you put up a dental practice over here? And he did it not of, out of a nice way for the people. No, he just wanted to get his own teeth fixed for nothing. Jeremias Barth had a lot of experience also what happened in Poland, because he left his mother and sister backwards, and he got letters, and they lived very nearby Belzet's camp. And of course at some moment in time the letters stopped. We have the last letters. His relationship with the Jewish Council was strained. He was called by to visit David Cahn, and they had a row because he was very uptight about what he saw, and he said, listen, do you know what happened in Poland? And it's mad what the Jewish Council of the Holland does, and it had consequences. The answer to him was, you're allowed to visit Theresienstadt and come back with your experience and bring us your report. Next day he got a notice, and you can see what the text is. He was his spare. He didn't get a spare, and he was put on the transportation list. Next day he went into hiding, this is the original source. You can see it suffered by time. Jeremias Barth went into hiding. It's a long story, you have to read it in the article. He is one of the people which falls under the definition of Yehuda Bauer's Amida. He put up a secret, he was a member of the secret synagogue at the Nieuwe Keizersgracht. He was one of the 10 members you needed for a mincha each week on Shabbos. You can read the rest afterwards. After the war, he suffered from hunger disease, and when he was well enough again, he reinstated the shul, the stiebel, in a Polish way in the Nieuwe Kerkstraat. And it was the Nidrei Israel Yechanes. and it was a stiebel for mostly Eastern European refugees. Our discussion is always, is the Jewish Council different from others? Well, in literature there's talk about a species, Hollandia judaica. We didn't invent it. This from Mr. Seligman from the 1920s. And it says, well, the Dutch Jews, they were over-assimilated in society. It's perhaps one of the reasons why 70% of all Jews were killed. They were so obedient. They didn't know, they didn't understand the ruthlessness. They were there for over hundreds and hundreds of years. But there's also, they were resisted. Resistance in Holland was discouraged. Even the Jewish Council resisted going into hiding. Jeremias Barth is important because he was clever and always escaped. In the short time he was in the Jewish Council, he made with his plaster Cahn duplicate keys. And these keys were used afterwards from October 1942 to escape. These keys opened doors in the Hollandsche Schouwburg. So people had to escape, could escape, and they escaped by night. When the German guardsmen were drunk and they opened the doors. And sadly enough, a lot of Jews returned the following days because their houses had been pulsed. That's a verb in Holland. And pulsed means that there was a moving organization that after Jews were brought to the Hollandse Schouwburg, the inventory was loaded in cars, and so people didn't come to houses where they lived. It were empty houses, so they had no place to go. Summary. The Jewish medical doctors tried their best to save patients from transport to the concentration camps. We don't know how many. Also, the medical doctors were completely unfamiliar with the Nazi ruthlessness, coupled with a relatively naivety of Dutch Jewish society. And other aspects of resistance of Jewish doctors should be noted, like gathering to celebrate Jewish holidays, small actions like getting food stamps, neutral social transport groups should be included, because we know this is one of the things Jeremias Barth did. And you have to take into account, Jewish doctors were not helped. In some cases they were antagonized by the Jewish authorities, and also, of course, non-Jewish authority. And at the end, we see these are the conclusions. Participated Jewish doctors in the resistance. Net outcome can't be measured. The speed and efficiency of relocation was terrible, quick. And you have to remember, a Dutch Jew is mostly a Jew, mostly a Dutchman, and a non-Dutch Jew is a Jew. So if you come from the Orthodox East, like Jeremias Barth did, then you are mostly a Jew. And then we want to remember a few of the doctors which were murdered. This big exhibition was in Holland, which traveling exhibition about Jewish doctors killed. Baruch Dayan Hemet.